Today I want to talk about how we talk about autistic women and girls and whether defining a particular presentation of autism as female autism is helpful, or whether, perhaps, it could be contributing to unhelpful gender stereotyping, and at the same time excluding people who might relate to this presentation but not identify as female. I was inspired to make this video after chatting to my friend Sam of the fantastic autism channel Yo Samdy Sam, and at the time she was working on a similar video, so she suggested that perhaps we do a very mini, very loose collaboration on the topic. In that we're both really overwhelmed with life at the moment, so any kind of organised collaboration feels like way too much. When I was diagnosed as autistic in 2015, I became aware of what was being described as the female presentation of autism. I did some research online and I found lists of signs of female autism. Things like relying on a close friend to guide them through the school day, and having more typical special interests that are more in line with their peers, things like literature, animals and music. Reading further, I found that autistic girls tend to be shy and perhaps passive. Not something that anyone has ever said about me. Then the biggest sign, and cited as the reason that so many autistic women and girls go undiagnosed, which was masking. I recently made a video about masking, which I'll link to in the description box. But in a nutshell, masking or camouflaging is when an autistic person hides their autism by modifying their behaviour and learning and mimicking neurotypical behaviours, such as learning to fake eye contact or learning the scripting around small talk. This is done in order to fit in with their peers. To be honest, at the time that I read these lists, I wondered whether I presented more like an autistic male. I didn't feel like I was presenting the way that the lists described. I wondered whether perhaps that's why getting my diagnosis had seemed more straightforward compared to other women that I'd spoken to. After researching female autism, I had this image of a quiet, withdrawn, bookish girl with one close friend who spends all her time hanging out in her bedroom with her pets, perhaps drawing. That she was internalising her anxiety and overwhelm, desperately trying to cope with navigating a complex social world and more concerned with fitting in than her male autistic peers. I didn't relate. I was loud, sociable, and often described as a bit much. I wasn't internalising my anxiety, it emerged as loud, destructive meltdowns. And there, I think, is one of the issues. It's not that this presentation isn't valid. It's not that autism isn't underdiagnosed in girls. It is. It's that when we describe a particular way of being as either male or female, we are stereotyping that presentation with gender expectations. And it feels to me like we are excluding people from that presentation. Boys who present that way, non-binary people and trans people. Basically, anyone who doesn't identify as a woman or a girl. During that first year post-diagnosis, I was asked to contribute to a focus group that the NAS were running to work on their training module about women and girls. And I was filmed talking about my experiences as an autistic woman for videos that are part of that training. I spoke at the National Autistic Women and Girls Conference twice. I guess I accepted the status quo. There was girl autism and boy autism, and I needed to raise awareness about girl autism because it was being underdiagnosed. Something that I'm still passionate about. I just don't think that we need to gender autism to address this. After I'd spoken at the first Women and Girls Conference, I received a tweet regarding the issues around having a Women and Girls Conference and how it was excluding transgender people. And it gave me pause for thought. Later, my autistic child came out as trans and changed her gender presentation. Did her autism change to fit her gender presentation? Obviously it didn't, but she's still an autistic girl. In fact, in some ways her autism did fit the stereotype. She is bookish, quiet, and she tends to hide her anxiety. But she also has some really typically described male autistic traits, like not being concerned enough with social approval to rely heavily on masking, and being first into Thomas the Tank Engine, and then Pokemon. Again, this didn't make her any less an autistic girl. So, is it possible that all autistic people are different, and that the issue with underdiagnosis is because of stereotypes around autism that need to be addressed, rather than creating a whole new category and gendered type of autism? Nonetheless, there is an issue with underdiagnosis of autistic women and girls. The most up-to-date current estimate is that for every 3 autistic male diagnoses, there will be 1 female autistic diagnosis. Perhaps it's to do with presentation. Females are typically socialised and treated differently to men. Though I hope that this will change in time, this is currently still true for a lot of girls. We are expected to demonstrate behaviours like gentleness, patience, and complex social skills that perhaps aren't expected of our male peers. Quirks are less tolerated if you're a woman. I've always felt that it might have been easier to have been a quirky, socially awkward man. But this is just my experience, and I can't speak to the experience of men, so please leave me a comment in the comment box if you have something to say on that. Or perhaps there are less autistic girls. Dr. Simon Baron-Cohen theorised in the mid-90s that the lower rate of diagnosis in autistic females could be explained by his extreme male brain theory of autism. Dr. Baron-Cohen proposed that males are at higher risk for autism because of in utero exposure to steroid hormones called androgens. This exposure, he theorised, accentuates the male tendency towards systemising behaviour or pattern recognition and diminishes the more female capacity to recognise social cues. Therefore, boys are made leaning towards the autistic spectrum, and exposure to excessive androgens in the womb would then push them closer towards being within the diagnostic range. Essentially, he was theorising that male and female brains are different, that men are more effective systemisers and women are more effective empathisers, and that since autistic people are considered less able empathisers than neurotypical people, this explains the discrepancy in the diagnosis of autism between genders. Where do I start with this one? Firstly, the basis for this theory relied on asking autistic adults to take a number of surveys. 3 surveys measuring systemising behaviour, empathy and autistic traits. The study concluded that autistic people have a male brain and perform better at systemising and lower at empathising. In my opinion, this study was flawed because the autistic way of being is simply different to the allistic or not autistic way of being. So making assumptions about autistic people based on surveys written by allistic people seems unhelpful. I also don't agree that autistic people are lacking in empathy. Sure, we might express our empathy differently, but in my experience, autistic people can be very empathetic. Additionally, in a second study at the University of Toronto, they gave people testosterone to see if it would affect their empathetic abilities. The subjects were dosed with either testosterone or a placebo, and then underwent testing which tests social intelligence. They found no statistically significant difference between the placebo group or the testosterone group. Now, obviously this isn't conclusive, but neither is Dr. Baron-Cohen's work. Personally, I don't think the difference in gender diagnostic rates is explained by an extremely male brain. I do think that expectations on women and girls may lead to them developing strategies that mean their autism is more hidden. But that's not just the case for females, it's also the case for anyone that was born female but now identifies as male or non-binary. It's not that I'm not seeing the problems with diagnosis, and it's not that I'm not validating those with what I would prefer to call a quieter, more camouflaged presentation of autism. It's that I'm not sure how helpful it is to label it as a gender difference, particularly now that we're learning more about gender and gender fluidity. Put simply, there are females, males, and non-binary people who slip through the diagnostic cracks because of the way that their autism presents. And there are girls whose autism isn't presenting this way. So when we label this presentation of autism as girl autism, we exclude many people from relating to this presentation. So what can we do? How can we identify and diagnose autistic females more efficiently, whilst including all autistic people when we describe this presentation of autism? I mean, this video isn't going to solve the problem. I'm just an autistic woman sitting at home overthinking stuff. Perhaps we could change the way that we look at autism, acknowledging the traits of autism that lead to diagnosis, but also acknowledging that these traits present differently in different people because, wait for it, all autistic people are different. We could dig a little deeper and consider ways of being autistic that are different but still fit within the diagnostic criteria. For example, using television as a place to learn about and imitate social behaviours, or depending on friends to navigate school. We could look at the ways that an autistic person is adjusting their autistic traits to cope with living in a world not designed for us as part of the diagnostic process. And we could do that for every person undergoing an autism assessment, regardless of their gender. We could acknowledge masking diagnostically, and doctors could consider masking as part of the assessment process, so that nobody ever again gets told that they can't be autistic because they make eye contact. Essentially, rather than creating a new gendered autism presentation and teaching people how to diagnose and support it, we could overhaul the entire system. Let's treat every autistic person as an individual with an individual presentation of traits and an individual set of needs. What do you think? Are you comfortable with the kind of autism that can go undiagnosed and unidentified being described as female autism? This is just something I've been thinking about more recently. Having a trans child makes you look at how we view gendered behaviours and stereotypes more closely, so it's been on my mind. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider hitting the like button. And if you've not already, please consider subscribing to my channel too. There are also a number of ways that you can support me financially as a creator and make it possible for me to do the work that I do. Take a look at the description box for more information about that. Thanks for watching. Bye bye!